My name is Senior Researcher Velen, and the moment that human girl walked through our airlock without a breathing mask, I knew something had gone terribly wrong. I am writing this report from a holding cell, so please forgive my tone. The council demanded a full account of what happened, and they shall have one. It began 3 cycles ago when our toxicology wing received approval for a study we had been waiting on for years. The grant was generous, 40 million credits, enough to keep my laboratory funded for a full decade. All we needed was a single volunteer from a Class 9 death world, and humans, being the only Class 12 species ever recorded, were the obvious choice. I drafted the safety paperwork myself. I remember laughing softly as I typed the precautions. The subject must not breathe more than a trace amount of sulfur compounds. The subject must not stand in heated chemical fog for more than 30 minutes. The subject must be watched closely for heart trouble at any radiation level above background. The council approved every line. The human signed every line. She did not even read past the second page. Her name was Holly. She was 24 years old, according to her file, and she walked into our facility wearing torn blue trousers, a faded gray shirt, and shoes that squeaked on the polished floor. She was chewing something pink and shiny between her back teeth, and the smell of it set off 3 separate alarms on my olfactory panel before she had even reached the front desk. I greeted her in the standard coalition manner, with all 4 arms folded in respect. She waved, just waved. Then she said, and I will never forget the words she said, "Oh my gosh, you guys are so cute, like little blue octopuses in lab coats." I did not know how to respond. No one had ever called me cute before. In my 800 years of research, no test subject had ever greeted me with anything other than fear, respect, or polite distance. This human looked at me as though I were a small pet she might like to take home. I cleared my throat through both of my breathing slits and led her toward the decontamination corridor. The corridor is calibrated to neutralize most known biological threats. As Holly walked through it, every single sensor on the ceiling began to flash red. The system identified her, a healthy young human in good standing, as a biological threat herself. I told myself this was fine. I told myself the readings were a calibration error. I should have stopped right there. I did not. My funding depended on it. So at 9:00 standard, I sealed Holly of Earth into Chamber 3, sat down at my console, and began what the council would later call the most damaging single hour in the history of comparative biology. The chamber was the finest we had. Reinforced walls, triple-sealed glass, small chair in the center bolted to the floor, a water dispenser in the corner, a speaker in the ceiling so we could communicate. Holly sat down and crossed her legs. "Where do I plug in my phone?" she asked. I told her there was no place to plug in her phone. We did not use that kind of port. We used inductive charging plates of a different frequency. "Oh," she said, "that stinks." She put the phone away. She looked around the room. She popped her gum. Sound of it made my assistant, a young researcher named Clest, jump in his seat. So she said brightly, "What are we doing today, Doc?" I activated the speaker. "Subject Holly," I said, "we will be testing your tolerance to several common gases and chemicals found in industrial environments across the galaxy. The exposures will be brief and controlled. Please inform us at once if you feel any discomfort, dizziness, nausea, or change in your vision. Do you understand? Holly gave me a thumbs up. I had read about this gesture. It is a sign of agreement among humans. Descended, the linguists say, from an ancient combat ritual involving short blades. I returned the gesture with one of my 4 hands, though it felt unnatural. I checked my readings, I checked my notes, I checked the live feed where the director of the bureau himself was watching from his office on the other side of the station, his pseudopods folded in the formal pose of academic interest. Then I began the first trial. I will tell you about the first trial in a moment, but first I must explain why my hands were shaking even before I started. You see, I had read Holly's file very carefully the night before. The file said she came from a place called Phoenix in the desert region of a continent called North America. The file said the average summer temperature in Phoenix was 45 degrees of their scale, which on our scale is hot enough to bake bread. The file said Holly had been raised on a farm where her family kept what humans call cattle, large herbivorous animals with horns. The file said she had once, at the age of 9, picked up a venomous snake with her bare hands because, and I quote her own statement, it looked sad. The galaxy had never tested a death world human before. The volunteers we usually got were quiet, careful types from soft worlds who agreed to mild experiments for spending money. We had records of Class 8 subjects. We had records of Class 9 subjects. We had even once tested a single Class 10 subject who was a polite gentleman from a moon called Brel and who fainted at the sight of mild acid. Holly was Class 12. Holly was the first Class 12 we had ever sealed inside a chamber. And Holly, sitting in our reinforced room with her gum and her dead foam, had absolutely no idea that the entire scientific reputation of my department was about to depend on whether or not she sneezed. I took a long, slow breath through both my breathing slits. I pressed the first button. Test 1 began at 9:14 Standard Time. The substance was hydrogen sulfide, common industrial gas with a strong, rotten smell. The galactic limit for safe exposure in mammalian species is 2 parts per million. The limit for unconsciousness is 40 parts per million. The limit for cellular collapse is 100 parts per million. I started Holly at half a part per million, a whisper less than the smell of a closed kitchen. She did not react. I went up to 1 part per million, then 2, then 5. At 5 parts per million, Holly's nose wrinkled. She said, "Hey doc, did something crawl into your vents and pass on?" I told her this was the first chemical test. I asked her to describe what she felt. She shrugged. "Smells like my Uncle Greg's farm," she said. "He kept chickens that didn't lay. Right, the eggs would go bad in the hen house and you'd find them weeks later. Same exact smell." I increased the concentration to 10 parts per million. She fanned her nose with her hand. I increased to 20. She rolled her eyes and said, "Doc, you got a window I can crack." I increased to 50 parts per million. This was the point at which my own kind would lose consciousness. This was the point at which any sensible coalition mammal would slump in their chair and require immediate evacuation. Clest, who was monitoring the air around the chamber from his outside console, suddenly went pale. There was a slight leak in the chamber. Seal microscopic, but enough to expose the outer room. Clest stood up unsteadily, took 2 stumbling steps, and slid quietly to the floor. I activated the emergency fans on his side of the room. He would be fine in a few minutes. He always was a fragile lad. Inside the chamber, Holly yawned. I increased the concentration to 100 parts per million. This was the point of cellular collapse. The galactic standard, the line that no living mammalian species had ever crossed and walked away from. I held my 4 hands frozen above my console. Holly stretched. So, she said into the speaker, "Are we starting anytime soon? Because I had a really big breakfast and I think I'm getting sleepy." I stared at my readings. I stared at her. I stared back at my readings. The screen showed 104 parts per million. The screen showed her heart rate at 68 beats per minute, slow and steady. The screen showed her oxygen saturation at 98%. The screen showed her blood pressure as 120/80, perfectly within normal range for her species. I pushed the dial higher. 200 parts per million. Holly began to hum a song. I could not identify the tune. Something about a lonely highway and a lost love. 300. Holly took out her gum, stuck it under the chair, and reached into her pocket for a fresh piece. She popped the new piece into her mouth. The wrapper landed on the floor. 400. 500. 600. At 700 parts per million, which is the level at which the great toxicologist Vran himself once declared in his seminal paper that no mammalian life can possibly persist for longer than 30 seconds. Holly looked up at the ceiling speaker. "Hey Doc," she said, "any chance you guys have coffee around here? The smell is making me think of breakfast, and now I'm hungry." My olfactory sensors, already overloaded, politely shut themselves off. In protest, my console began to beep in 3 different alarm tones at once. The director on the secondary monitor had not blinked in 2 full minutes. He was, I should mention, a species that does not have eyelids. I terminated the trial. The fans roared to life inside the chamber, sucking the gas out at maximum speed. The air cleared in less than a minute. Holly waved her hand in front of her face, said something about how that was an interesting smell, and asked if we had any snacks she could munch on while we waited for the next test. It had been 11 minutes since we started. 11 minutes, and the galactic standard for hydrogen sulfide tolerance, a standard built on 12,000 years of careful research on the lifetimes of dozens of brilliant scientists, on the foundation of an entire branch of medicine, had just been cheerfully shattered by a young woman from Phoenix who thought I was cute and who chewed Clear's throat gum like it was her job. The first toxin limit had fallen. I should have stopped. I should have closed the chamber, written up the day as a calibration anomaly, and gone home to sleep. But the director was watching, the funding committee was watching, and somewhere deep in the part of my brain that all researchers carry, the small, foolish part that whispers, "Go on, just one more, you must know," the question had already taken root. If Holly could survive that, what else could she survive? I reached for the second dial. I cleared my throat through the speaker and tried to keep my voice steady. "Holly," I said, "we are now beginning the second trial. Please remain seated." She gave me another thumbs up. I have reviewed this moment many times. In the days since, I have replayed it on the recording. I have watched myself, calm and professional on the outside, reaching for that dial with a hand that was beginning just slightly to tremble. I have watched Holly in the chamber reach into her bag and pull out a small plastic pouch of dried fruit, which she opened with her teeth. I have watched myself notice the bag. I have watched myself say nothing about the bag. This was my second mistake of the day. And it was, in many ways, the worst one. Because in that small plastic bag, along with the dried fruit, there was a metal cylinder, yellow lettering, tall and thin, the kind of beverage container you might find at any roadside shop on Earth. I did not see it then. I would see it later. But by then, of course, it would be far too late. The first trial had ended at 9:25. The second trial began at 9:27. And the worst hour of my professional life had only just begun. The second test was supposed to be simpler than the first. It was a measurement of pain response to a chemical called capsaicin, the compound found in hot peppers. The galactic threshold for pain tolerance to capsaicin in mammals is well documented. At a saturation of 50,000 units, the average mammalian species cries out and begs for relief. At 100,000 units, the mucous membranes of the eyes and nose begin to burn so fiercely that the subject usually loses the ability to speak. At 200,000 units, no coalition species has ever lasted longer than 90 seconds without medical intervention. I prepared the trial with care. I set the initial level very low at 5,000 units just to gauge Holly's response. I activated the speaker. "Holly," I said, "the next test will introduce a heat compound into the air. It is the same compound found in spicy foods on your home world. Please tell me at once if you feel burning in your eyes, your nose, your throat, or your lungs." Holly's face brightened. "Oh, spicy," she said. "Heck yes, hit me, doc. I eat hot wings for breakfast." I did not know what hot wings were. I assumed they were some kind of small flying creature, perhaps eaten in a religious ceremony. I would learn later that I was wrong on every count. I released the first dose. Holly inhaled deeply. She smiled. "Oh," she said, that's like a mild salsa, crank it up." I increased the concentration to 10,000 units. She giggled. I increased it to 25,000. "Now we're talking," she said. "Bring it on, duck." I increased to 50,000 units, the galactic threshold for begging. Holly's eyes began to water just a little. She blinked a few times, then she reached up, wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, and laughed out loud. "Oh, this is fun," she said. "This reminds me of my cousin Bobby's chili cook-off. He puts in 3 kinds of pepper, and if you can finish a bowl, he gives you a t-shirt. I have 9 of those t-shirts." I increased the concentration to 100,000 units. This was the point at which the average mammal lost the ability to speak. Holly, however, started singing. She sang loudly. She sang badly. She sang a song about a place called Margaritaville, which appeared to be some sort of coastal village where people drank fruit beverages and lost various items of clothing. The song went on for a long time. There were many verses. I increased the concentration to 200,000 units. This was the point at which no coalition species had ever survived for more than 90 seconds. Holly stood up. She did a little dance. She made what I can only describe as a celebratory hand gesture, both arms, the air, fingers spread wide, hips moving in a rhythmic pattern. She was still singing, her eyes were still watering, her nose was running. She was, by every measurement on my console, in a state that should have rendered her unconscious. She was also, very clearly, having the time of her life. Clest, who had recovered from the first trial and returned to his console, made a small whimpering sound and put his head between his knees. The director on the monitor had begun to make a noise I had never heard before. It was a deep, low rumbling, like distant thunder. I would learn later that this was the sound a species made when they were processing genuine astonishment. I increased the concentration to 300,000 units. Holly stopped dancing. She looked at the speaker. "Doc," she said. "Hey Doc, real quick. Do you guys have any chips like tortilla chips? Because this is making me crave nachos so bad right now." I did not know what nachos were. I did not have any chips. I did not have any chips of any variety. I had a research chamber full of 300,000 units of pure capsaicin saturation, a young human who was now asking me about Earth snacks, and a department head who was rumbling like a tectonic plate. I increased the concentration to 500,000 units. This was a dose at which, according to my own department's projections, the air should have become physically impossible for any creature to breathe. The water in Holly's eyes should have boiled. The skin of her face should have peeled. The membranes of her nose should have swollen shut. Instead, Holly sat back down in her chair, sniffed once, and said, "You know, the weird thing is, this is actually pretty mild. My grandma used to make a salsa that was way hotter than this. She used ghost peppers and Carolina Reapers, and she said it was for medicine. She lived to be 92. I terminated the trial. The chamber fans roared again. The capsaicin began to clear. Holly leaned back in her chair, fanned her face with her hand, and closed her eyes for a moment as though enjoying a pleasant breeze. It was 9:41, 23 minutes from the start. The second toxin limit had fallen. I sat in silence at my console for what must have been 30 full seconds. My 4 hands hovered over the controls. My breathing slits were wide open. My olfactory sensors were still recovering from the first trial. My funding, my career, my entire field of research was on the screen in front of me, and Holly was in the chamber asking if she could take her sweater off because it was getting warm. The director's voice came through my private channel. "Velen," he said. His voice was very calm. "Yes, Director," I said. "Continue," he said. "Director," I began, "perhaps we should consider." "Continue," he said again. I knew that tone. Every researcher in the coalition knew that tone. It was the tone of a senior official whose entire career was now wrapped up in the outcome of a single experiment, and who would not under any circumstances allow that experiment to be stopped before its proper conclusion. I continued. The third trial was radiation, specifically a controlled dose of ionizing radiation, the kind found in the outer layers of certain industrial environments and on the surface of particular asteroid. Mining colonies, the galactic threshold for safe exposure is very low. The threshold for sickness is moderate. The threshold for the condition known as acute radiation syndrome is high. Beyond that, no living mammalian species has ever been recorded to survive without immediate and extensive medical care. I activated the emitters. Holly, I said, the next test involves a low-level radiation field. You may feel slight warmth on your skin. Please, tell me at once if you feel nauseous, dizzy, or if your vision changes. Holly, who was now sitting cross-legged on her chair like a small child, gave me another thumbs up. I started at the safe level. She did not react. I increased to the sickness level. She wiggled her toes. I increased to the syndrome level. Wait, Holly said, is this an X-ray? Are you giving me an X-ray? Because if so, my dentist is going to be so mad. He told me not to get any more X-rays this year, something about cumulative exposure. I increased the dose further. Her readings remained perfect, heart rate steady, blood pressure normal, no cellular damage that my scanners could detect. I increased again. Her DNA on my deep tissue monitor was actually showing minor self-repair activity, not damage repair, as though her cells were so used to environmental stress that they were taking the opportunity to clean up old issues. I'd never seen anything like it. I increased the dose to level that in the records of the Galactic Medical Authority had only been survived once by a small water-dwelling creature called a tardigrade, accidentally launched into the vacuum of space and recovered 3 years later. The tardigrade had been celebrated as a marvel of biology. Its survival had been the subject of 17 major papers and one popular children's book. Holly, exposed to the same dose, looked at her wrist. Oh man, she said, my phone died. I was going to check my texts. It was 9:51. 41 minutes from the start. The third toxin limit had fallen. I terminated the trial. I shut down the emitters. I stared at the readings and I felt something cold and sharp inside my chest, the feeling that any researcher feels when they realize the universe is not quite the shape they thought it was. Holly in the chamber stretched her arms over her head and yawned. So Doc, she said, how many more of these? Because I got to tell you, I'm getting kind of thirsty. She reached into her bag. She pulled out the cylinder, the yellow letters, the metal can, the thing my sensors had logged at intake. But my busy mind had failed to flag. My olfactory panel, finally back online, immediately identified the contents and produced a warning I had never seen before in my 800 years of laboratory work. Warning, the panel read, substance unknown, component analysis incomplete, trace caffeine detected, trace fermented grain product detected, one unidentified compound labeled by your database as taurine, origin unknown, function unknown, biological effect unknown. I lunged toward the speaker. Holly, I said, Holly, please do not drink that. Holly looked at the speaker. She looked at the can. She popped the tab. The sound of carbonation hissed gently through the chamber. She brought the can to her lips and tilted her head back. She drank the entire thing in approximately 4 seconds. She crushed the empty can in her hand, dropped it on the floor, and made a small, satisfied sound. Then she said, Oh hey doc, where's the bathroom? The fourth and final hour of my career as a respected researcher had now begun, and I, senior researcher Velen, had absolutely no idea what was about to happen next. I want to be very clear for the record that I did not authorize the fourth trial. The fourth trial was Holly's idea. To this day, I do not know if she meant to do it. I do not know if she understood in any meaningful way what that beverage of hers actually was. I do not know if humans, as a general rule, understand what is in their road sodas, or if they simply trust the bright colors and yellow lettering and assume that everything will be fine. I suspect it is the second one. What I do know is this: Holly drank that can in 4 seconds and 14 minutes after. She drank it while my team and I were still trying to recover from the radiation trial and prepare the chamber for a fourth and final test of our choosing. And GT snorts. And GT. Holly raised her hand very politely, like a child in a classroom, and asked again where the bathroom was. I had forgotten that the chamber had a small sealed waste reclamation closet built into its rear wall. It was a standard feature of all our long-duration test chambers. The system inside this closet was designed to process the waste of the average coalition test subject. It was rated very specifically for biological output of moderate toxicity. It was not, and I cannot stress this enough, rated for the output of a class 12 death world human who had just consumed an unknown earth beverage on top of a breakfast that, according to her own offhand comment, included something called bacon. I directed Holly to the closet. She thanked me. She closed the door. For approximately 7 minutes, nothing of note occurred. Then the alarms began. The first alarm was the standard waste processing alert. It is a small, soft chime that informs the technician on duty that the system has detected an unusual biological compound. It is gentle, it is friendly, it says in pleasant tones. Please review the latest sample. The second alarm came 30 seconds later. It was louder, it was less friendly. It said informal coalition speech. Sample exceeds standard processing parameters. The third alarm was something I had never heard before. It was a deep, urgent siren. It sounded from every speaker in the laboratory at once. The lights on the ceiling shifted from white to amber. The director's monitor in the corner began to flash red. My console produced a message I did not recognize in a font I had never seen, and the message read: environmental hazard detected. Evacuate all sensitive personnel immediately. I turned to Clest. Clest was already gone. I snorts caught a glimpse of his back as he sprinted out of the observation room, both of his arms wrapped around his head. I turned to my readings. The waste reclamation system inside the chamber had, in its 800 years of operation, never once produced a hazard alert. It was designed to handle the biological output of any sapient species in the coalition, no matter how strange, no matter how unusual. It had handled the waste of methane breathers, of acid drinkers, of creatures that ate rocks, of creatures that ate other creatures, of creatures that frankly I would prefer not to describe in this report. It had handled all of them without complaint. Holly's output had broken it. The system, according to my readings, had attempted to process the waste using Its standard protocol, it had failed. It had attempted again, using its emergency protocol. It had also failed. It had, then in a final desperate attempt, activated its industrial chemical spill subroutine, a routine that had until this moment never once been triggered. In the field, that had also failed. A faint green vapor, the color of old apples, was beginning to seep from the vent above the closet door. The vapor was, according to my air monitors, a chemical stew so unusual that it did not match any compound in our database. It contained in trace amounts ammonia, sulfur, ethanol breakdown products, and at least 2 compounds that the database simply listed as unknown. Holly emerged from the closet. She closed the door behind her. She walked back to her chair. She sat down. She looked up at the speaker. "Hey, Doc," she said, "I don't know what was in that drink, but I think it didn't agree with me. Sorry about that. Was it something I ate?" I tried to speak. I could not. The director's voice, which had been silent for the last 3 trials, came through my private channel. It was once again very calm. The kind of calm that I now understood was the sound of a senior official reaching for the button that would terminate not only the experiment but possibly the entire department. "Velen," he said. "Yes, Director." "End it." "Yes, Director." "End it now." I activated the emergency protocol, the chamber's atmospheric scrubbers, designed to remove any contaminant. Less than 30 seconds, struggled for nearly 4 full minutes. The green vapor refused to clear. The waste reclamation system, finally giving up, made a small, sad mechanical sound and shut itself down permanently. Holly in the chamber washed her hands at the small sink. She dried them on a paper towel. She looked at the flashing red lights and the swirling green vapor and the alarms that were still wailing across the entire laboratory, and she made a small, concerned face. "Did I break something?" she asked. I could not bring myself to answer. The 4th limit had fallen at 10:07, exactly 1 hour and 7 minutes after Holly had first walked through our airlock. By any standard the Galactic Bureau of Research used, the experiment was now complete and total catastrophe. By any standard the funding committee used, my career was over. By any standard the director used, I was already in his mind packing my belongings. I opened the chamber. The fans had finally cleared the air. Holly stepped out, picked up her bag, and walked over to my console with the bright, easy step of a young woman who has just had a slightly unusual morning. She looked at my screens. She looked at me. She frowned. "You okay, Doc?" she said. "You look kind of pale, or like paler than normal. I don't know what your baseline is." I told her I was fine. She did not believe me. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small wrapped bar of some kind. She offered it to me. "Granola," she said. "It's got chocolate chips. Always helps me when I feel weird." I declined politely. She shrugged, opened the bar herself, and began to eat it as she walked toward the exit. At the door she turned back. "Hey, Doc," she said, "so did I pass the test? Because if I passed, I was hoping I could get the credits early. My rent's due next week and my landlord is being a real piece of work about it." I told her she had passed. I told her she had passed every test we had ever designed and several we had not yet thought of. I told her the credits would be in her Account within the hour. She gave me one final thumbs up, said, "Thanks, Doc, you guys are still cute," and walked out of my laboratory and out of my professional life forever. I sat at my console for a long time. After she was gone, the alarms had finally stopped, the green vapor had finally cleared. The waste reclamation system was beyond repair, but the air was breathable again. Clest somewhere down the hall was being checked on by a medic. The director's monitor had gone dark. My private channel chimed. It was a message from the funding committee. I opened it. The message was brief. It was, in fact, one of the briefest official messages I had ever received from the committee in my entire career. It read informal. Coalition script. Researcher Velen, effective immediately. The grant for Project Cross Species Tolerance Thresholds in Sapient Mammals is rescinded in full. All remaining funds will be returned to the Bureau Treasury, your laboratory. Access has been suspended pending review. Please report to administrative holding by end of day. Signed, the committee. I read the message 3 times. Then I sat back in my chair, folded all 4 of my arms across my chest, and laughed. It was not a happy laugh. It was the laugh of a researcher who has just realized in a single hour that everything he thought he knew about toxicity, about life, about the basic shape of biology in the galaxy was wrong. It was the laugh of a creature who has just been beaten by a young human girl who chewed gum, drank a road soda, sang about a fictional coastal town, and walked out the door asking about her rent. The laughter went on for some time. When I finally stopped, I packed my notebook into my satchel, closed down my console, and walked toward the administrative wing to begin the long process of explaining myself to the council. The hallways were quiet. Other researchers, having heard the alarms, had wisely decided not to ask any questions. I passed Clest on his way back from the medical bay. He did not meet my eyes. He would, I learned later, transfer to a department that studies sedimentary rocks. He would tell his new colleagues that the work was, and I quote his transfer letter, blessedly inert. I did not blame him. I was in many ways the only one left to face the council, the only one who had been at the console, the only one whose name was on the original grant application, the only one who had, writing in front of witnesses, signed the document that allowed Holly of Earth into our facility without a single proper safeguard for what she actually was. The council convened that very afternoon. What happened next I will tell you about in my next entry, because it is, in some ways, the most important part of this entire account, and I do not want to rush it. I will only say for now that the council's reaction was not what I expected. It was not anger. It was not even disappointment. It was something far stranger. It was fear. Not fear of me, not fear of Holly, fear of what Holly had revealed, fear of what the rest of the galaxy now had to consider in light of what a single young woman from a place called Phoenix had cheerfully demonstrated in a single hour, with a single can of bright yellow road soda and a piece of pink wintergreen gum still tucked between her back teeth. The fear of an entire coalition discovering all at once that one of its member species was not what it had thought. Not at all. The council convened in the high chamber on the 14th floor of the administrative tower, in a room that has, for almost a thousand years been used to discuss matters of profound importance to the coalition. I had been in this room only twice before in my career, once to receive a research medal, once to deliver a lecture on toxin tolerance in burrowing mammals. I had never expected to be in it as the subject of a formal inquiry. The chamber was circular. The council members sat in a tall ring around the speaker's platform in the center. There were 9 of them in total, each represented a major branch of coalition science. Each had a vote, and each on this particular afternoon was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on a council member before. It was not anger. I had expected anger. It was not disappointment. I had expected that too. It was something far stranger. It was the look of a being who has just been told something they did not want to hear, and who is now trying to decide what to do about it. The council chair, an elder of the cephalopod people called Resum, raised her primary tentacle for silence. Researcher Velen, she said, you have read the report of this morning's events. Yes, Chair, I said. You have reviewed the data. Yes, Chair. You agree the data is accurate. I do, Chair. She nodded slowly. Then we have a problem, she said. Not the problem you may think. We are not here to discipline you. The committee has already rescinded your grant. That matter is closed. What we are here to discuss is far larger than your career, your laboratory, or the broken machine. In your chamber, we are here to discuss what your subject revealed. I bowed my head slightly. I was not sure what to say. The chair turned to the other members. Council, she said, we have for many centuries treated the human species as a curiosity, a new member of our family, recently arrived, of modest means and modest reach. We have written them into our records as a Class 12 death world species, but that classification was assigned conservatively. We did not truly believe Class 12 existed in the way the old papers described. The death world classifications, as you know, were created during the early days of expansion, when many of the descriptions were exaggerated for the sake of caution. She paused. We were wrong, she said. Descriptions were not exaggerated. They were, if anything, polite. A murmur ran around the ring. The chair held up her tentacle again. The data from this morning, she continued, has been reviewed by 3 independent toxicology teams in the last 2 hours. All 3 have confirmed the readings. All 3 have confirmed all 3 have confirmed that the subject, a young human female of average build, no special training, no enhancement, no implants, no chemical preparation, casually exceeded 4 of the most established toxin limits in our scientific record. She did so without distress. She did so without injury. She did so by her own report, while finding the experience mildly interesting. A second murmur ran around the ring. This one was louder. A council member rose. He was a tall, thin being from the methane reach, his name Tasik, and his voice was usually soft. Today it was sharp. Chair, he said, with respect, I have served on this council for 140 years. I have voted on the toxicology standards twice in that time. Both times the vote was unanimous. Both times the standards were considered the foundation of our medical science. Are we now saying that the foundation is incorrect? The chair turned her many eyes toward him. We are saying, she said carefully, that the foundation was correct for every species we have ever measured. Except one. The room went very quiet. I stood at the speaker's platform with all four of my arms folded behind my back, and I waited. I did not know what was coming. I had assumed on the walk to the chamber that I would be reprimanded, perhaps demoted, perhaps even removed from my position entirely. I had not assumed that I would be in the middle of a discussion that, if I read the room correctly, was about to redefine the coalition's understanding of an entire member species. The chair turned back to me. Valen, she said, we have a question for you. Yes, Chair. Your subject, Holly of Earth, did she, at any point in her conversation with you, give any indication that she found the experiments unusual? I thought about it. No, Chair, I said. She found the gases inconvenient. She found the heat compound enjoyable. She was unaware that the radiation was unusual. She was in fact more concerned about her phone running out of power and her rent being due than about any of the substances we exposed her to. The chair closed 3 of her eyes. The other 6 remained open and fixed on me. She was unaware, the chair repeated. Yes, Chair. She did not understand that what she was doing was extraordinary. She did not, Chair. A long silence followed. I could hear the soft hum of the chamber's air system. I could hear the gentle clicking of the council recorder taking down every word. I could hear somewhere far below us the distant sound of a transport vehicle passing through the docks. Finally, the chair spoke again. Council, she said, I will now share with you a piece of information that has not yet been made public. It was passed to me 1 hour ago by the Bureau of Long Range Surveys. I had hoped to release it through formal channels. Events have made that impossible. She tapped her tentacle on the table. The current population of the human species on their home world and across their colonies is approximately 12 billion individuals. Another murmur, louder still. I knew the number was large. I had not realized it was that large. The chair continued. Of those 12 billion, approximately 99.9% are the same general type as our subject. This morning, average build, average tolerance, no special training, no enhancement. They are not the strongest of their kind. They are not the most resistant. They are, in the words of our surveyors, the baseline. She paused. The remaining 0.1% are, by human standards, considered exceptional. Soldiers, athletes, survival specialists, persons who have trained their bodies to perform feats that even other humans regard as impressive. She looked around the ring. If our subject this morning, a baseline human with no training, with no preparation, with no enhancement, casually exceeded 4 of our toxin limits in a single hour, the question this council must now consider is what the exceptional ones can do. The room was silent for a very long time. I had not thought about it that way. I had been so focused on Holly herself, on her gum, on her road soda, on her offhand questions about chips and bathrooms, that I had failed to consider the larger picture. Holly was not unique. Holly was ordinary. Holly was, by every measurement her own people would have used, an entirely average young woman. There were billions more like her, and among those billions there were some who were considered remarkable even by Earth standards. I felt something cold move through my chest. Tessic, the methane-rich counselor, spoke again. Chair, he said, his voice was even sharper now, are you suggesting that the human species is dangerous? The chair did not answer immediately. When she did, her voice was very careful. I am suggesting, she said, that we have, for the entire duration of our relationship with Earth, treated humans as if they were Class 5 or Class 6 species with an unusual homeworld. I am suggesting that this assessment was, to put it gently, inaccurate. I am suggesting that the data from this morning indicates that humans may be, in terms of raw biological resilience, the most robust mammalian sapients we have ever encountered. She let the word sit. Then she added, I'm also suggesting that this is not in itself a reason for alarm. The humans have given us no indication of hostile intent. They have signed every treaty. They have honored every agreement. They have in fact been one of the most cooperative new members the coalition has welcomed in 2 centuries. Our concern is not their behavior. Our concern is the gap between what we believed about them and what they actually are. A new counselor rose. She was small and round, of the silicate people, and her name was Anna. Chair, she said, may I speak to the practical matter, please? The grant for researcher Velen's project was 40 million credits. I am not concerned about the credits. I am concerned about the fact that this project, as designed, was meant to test the upper limits of mammalian tolerance for the purpose of designing safety equipment, industrial breathing masks, radiation shielding, environmental suits for off-world workers. The standards we use for these products are based on the toxin limits that we now know to be, in the case of one species, completely useless. She paused. There are at this moment 27,000 humans working on coalition mining stations in environments calibrated for our standards. Those humans have for years been reporting to their supervisors that the safety equipment is uncomfortable, too restrictive, too cautious. Their supervisors have ignored these reports because the equipment meets all of our certifications. She looked around the ring. We have been protecting humans from environments that, by our data this morning, do not threaten them in any meaningful way. Another long silence. The chair nodded slowly. Thank you, Anna, she said. That is the practical matter. There is also the scientific matter, which is that several entire branches of our medical research are now in question. There is also the diplomatic matter, which is that we will need to inform the human delegation of our findings without alarming them. There is also the philosophical matter, which is that we will need to update our classification system and possibly create a new category above Class 12. She paused. But for now, she said, the immediate matter before us is what to do with researcher Valen. All eyes turned to me. I straightened my back. I prepared myself for the reprimand. Valen, the chair said, you designed a flawed experiment. You ignored proper safety review. You allowed an unknown beverage into a sealed test chamber. You damaged a piece of equipment that has served the Bureau for 800 years by every standard of professional conduct. You have failed. I bowed my head. However, she continued. I looked up. You also produced in a single hour more useful data on the limits of human biology than the entire coalition has produced in the 200 years since first contact. You did so by accident. You did so against your own intentions. You did so, in fact, while trying to confirm a set of standards that you now know to be wrong, but you did it. She tapped her tentacle on the table. Again, the council will not restore your grant. That matter is closed. The funding committee has spoken, and we will not overrule them. However, the Bureau is opening a new department effective immediately to study the human species in a more accurate manner. The department will be funded at a level of 200 million credits. It will be staffed with researchers from across the coalition. It will operate under strict ethical guidelines in full cooperation with the human delegation, with subjects who are properly informed of the scientific significance of their participation. She paused. We would like you to lead this department. I stared at her. I was not sure I had heard correctly. The chair, sensing my confusion, repeated herself. We would like you, Researcher Velen, to lead the new Department of Human Comparative Biology. You would report directly to this council. You would have full authority over research design, subject recruitment, and publication. You would also, I should mention, have permission to invite Holly of Earth back as a paid consultant should she be willing. I opened and closed my breathing slits several times. I was not in that moment capable of speech. Tessic, the methane-rich counselor, made a small sound of disapproval. Chair, he said, surely there are other researchers more qualified. The chair turned to him. Tessic, she said, there are many researchers more qualified by reputation. There are none more qualified by experience. Velen has spent more time in direct observation of a Class 12 human than any coalition scientist in history. He has, for better or worse, the unique distinction of having watched one of them do 4 things that, until this morning, were considered biologically impossible. He is the natural choice. She turned back to me. Researcher Velen, will you accept? I thought about it. I thought about Holly. I thought about her gum. I thought about her road soda. I thought about the way she had walked out of my laboratory that morning, cheerful and untroubled, asking about her rent. I thought about the 12 billion humans, most of them just like her, going about their daily lives on a world where the air, the water, the plants, the animals, the very sunlight itself, was by coalition standards mildly hostile. I thought about what it would mean to study them properly. I thought about how much there was to learn. I thought about how, in 800 years of research, I had never, not once, felt the kind of sharp, clean curiosity that I felt at this moment. The kind of curiosity that comes only when you realize the universe is much larger than you thought it was. Yes, Chair, I said, I accept. The chair nodded. Good, she said, the department opens in 3 days. Your office will be on the 7th floor. Your assistant, classed, has been reassigned to sedimentary rocks at his own request, but I am sure we can find you someone new. We will also be transferring your former laboratory to the new department with the broken waste reclamation system removed and replaced. She paused. And Velen. Yes, Chair. Please contact Holly of Earth. Inform her that the coalition would like to hire her as a long-term consultant. Offer her, let us say, 10 times the original grant amount. Make sure she understands that her participation is voluntary, that she may withdraw at any time, and that we are very interested in meeting her cousin Bobby and his chili cook-off. The chair, despite herself, made the small sound her people make when they are amused. I bowed deeply. I left the chamber. I walked down the long corridor to the elevator, and as the doors closed and the floor began to descend, I found that I was, for the first time in my entire career, smiling. All four of my hands were trembling slightly. My breathing slits were wide open. My olfactory sensors, fully recovered now, were picking up the soft, pleasant scent of the administrative wing's air system. I had lost my grant. I had gained a department. I had been humiliated by a young woman from Phoenix who chewed gum and drank road sodas, and now I was about to invite her back at 10 times the price to teach an entire coalition department what humans were really made of. I reached the ground floor. I walked out of the administrative tower and into the cool evening air of the station. I had somewhere in my satchel the contact information that Holly had provided at intake. I would send her message that very night. I would tell her about the new department. I would tell her about the consulting offer. I would tell her that the coalition had decided, after careful review, that her morning at our facility had been one of the most important hours in the history of comparative biology. I would not tell her at first about the broken waste reclamation system. That conversation could wait. The walk to my quarters was a long one. The station's evening lights had come on, soft and golden, and the walkways were busy with workers heading home. I passed beings of every species in the coalition: the cephalopod people, the methane breathers, the silicate folk, the tall, thin beings from the cold worlds, the short, sturdy beings from the heavy worlds, and here and there, walking among them, I saw humans. Just a few workers from the trade docks, mostly women in work clothes carrying tools, men with rolled-up sleeves and tired but satisfied faces, young people in the soft, casual clothing they seemed to prefer for everything. They walked among the other species, easily, without fear, without caution, as though they had not noticed that the air on the station had been calibrated very carefully by my own department to be safe for all sapient life. They had not noticed because they had not needed to notice. The air was, for them, perfectly fine. It would always have been fine, even without our calibration. I watched a young human woman pass by me. On the walkway, she was carrying a small bag of some kind, and she was eating something sweet from a wrapper. She did not see me. She was humming a song. It sounded a little like the one Holly had sung in the chamber, though I could not be certain. I let her pass. I continued home. That night in my quarters, I sat down at my desk and began to write the message to Holly. It took me a long time. I wanted to find the right words. I wanted to explain without alarming her what her morning had revealed. I wanted to invite her back without pressuring her. I wanted to be honest about the science, without making it sound either too simple or too important. In the end, I kept it short. Holly, I wrote, this is researcher Velen from the toxicology study. I hope this message finds you well. I am writing to inform you that the data from your visit was significant. I would like to offer you a long-term consulting position with our new department. The pay will be substantial. The work will be light. We would also be very Interested in any of your relatives who, in your words, eat hot wings for breakfast? Please let me know if you are interested. With respect, Velen. I sent the message. I sat back in my chair. The message indicator showed that it had been received. 3 minutes later, a reply came back. It was in the human style, short and direct. Hey Doc, the reply read, glad to hear from you. Yeah, I'm down. How much is substantial? Also, can my cousin Bobby come? He makes the best chili in the county and I think you'd like him. Let me know. I read the message twice. I laughed again for the second time that day. This time it was a different kind of laugh, a laugh of relief, a laugh of the future, a laugh of a researcher who has just realized that the most important work of his career is not behind him but ahead of him, and that it will involve, among other things, learning what hot wings are, what road sodas contain, and what a chili cook-off looks like in person. I wrote back. Holly, I wrote, the pay is 10 times the original grant amount. Cousin Bobby is welcome. Please bring his chili. I will arrange transport. With respect, Velen. The reply came back in less than a minute. Cool, the message read. See you soon. Tell your friends to bring milk. They're going to need it. I did not at first understand what milk had to do with chili. I would learn many things in the months and years that followed as the Department of Human Comparative Biology opened its doors, and Holly of Earth, along with her cousin Bobby and a rotating collection of other relatives, came to teach a curious, terrified, deeply respectful coalition what a class 12 species really was. I would learn that the 4 toxin limits Holly had broken in that single hour were, in the grand scheme of things, only the beginning. I would learn that humans had limits we had not yet measured, capabilities we had not yet observed, biological quirks that made every previous theory of mammalian life look like a child's drawing of the truth. I would learn that the funding committee, having cut my original grant in shame, would within 6 months be begging the new department for results, for papers, for any scrap of data we could share. I would learn that the broken waste reclamation system had become, by some quiet decision of the Bureau, a museum piece. It now sits in the lobby of the new department behind a glass case with a small plaque beneath it. The plaque reads, informal coalition script. This unit served the Bureau of Comparative Biology for 800 years. It was decommissioned on the morning of its final test. The cause of decommission is preserved in the official record as a reminder that the universe is always larger than we think it is. Visitors, especially humans, find this very funny. Holly, when she first saw it, laughed for almost 5 minutes. She then asked if I had any chips. I had by that point learned to keep some on hand. That is the end of my account, counsel. I have left out only the personal moments, the friendship that grew between Holly and me, the long evening spent listening to her cousin Bobby's stories of the family farm. The day, 2 years later, when I was invited to Earth itself and stood for the first time on the surface of a Class 12 world, breathing air that was, by coalition standards, hostile, and finding, to my surprise, that I could breathe it just fine if I took it slow. I have left these things out because they are, in the end, not part of the official record, but they are, I think, the most important things of all. They are the reason I am writing this report, not from a holding cell, as I joked at the start, but from the bright, comfortable office of the director of the Department of Human Comparative Biology, a department that has, in 5 years, produced more scientific papers than any other in the coalition, and a department that exists because, on a quiet morning long ago, a young woman from Phoenix walked through our airlock without a breathing mask and very politely asked us if we had any coffee. We did not at the time have coffee. We do now. We have the best coffee in the station, Holly insisted. End of report, filed by Senior Director Velen, Department of Human Comparative Biology, with respect and gratitude to the Council, and with one final note for the record that the universe is always larger than we think, that humans are always tougher than we expect, and that the sound of a young woman laughing in a sealed chamber while every alarm in the building wails around her is a sound I will remember, I think, for the rest of my long and now considerably more interesting life.